You never want to dry wipe a long line of sealant, especially not on old dried out gel coat. I'm going to show you the 3 best ways to make a sealant line look like this. Now, it's super important to know a couple of things when it comes to sealing and wiping up sealant. With the first thing to realize if you're working with old dried out gel coat or if you're working with new, fresh, clean gel coat. The old gel coat is going to be super absorbent, and so that's why it's very important when we're talking about sealants, oils, and stuff like that, because it will stain the gel coat. The gel coat is going to absorb that stuff into the pores of the gel coat, and it could end up making a massive mess for you to have to try and clean up. Just because sealant is messy doesn't mean that we got to make a mess. And because it absorbs into the pores, it can be difficult to make your sealant lines look legit if the gel coat's absorbing your sealant and just spreading it out and making it look like a mess. Now, when it comes to getting the old sealant out, it's really easy. We just need to take a utility knife with a brand new blade on it, and then we're going to run that blade at an angle on one side of the sealant so that the angle goes smoothly against the gel coat and it cuts the sealant away from the gel coat, but it doesn't dig into the gel coat. Then once we go down one side completely, we can come back on the other side of the sealant, and on that other side of the sealant, we'll run the knife down exactly the same way, cutting it in the opposite angle. Then we can just come back with something to stick down in between the two sides of the fiberglass and just pry out the big piece of sealant that's in there. We'll go ahead and pry out all that old sealant, and then we'll clean everything up. It's important that everything is super clean before you try and put any new sealant down, because if you've got any kind of dirt or oil or any kind of grease where you're trying to seal, then that's going to not allow the sealant to seal properly, and it's just going to come off later and it's going to look like crap and it'll leak and it'll cause you all kinds of problems. So make sure that it's super clean before you try and seal anything up. Then before sealing anything up, we need to talk about the types of sealant, because the type of sealant is going to be super important. You want to use some quality stuff. There's a lot of cheap sealant out there, and that stuff is just going to separate later on down the line. That cheap stuff is just going to separate from the gel coat and it's going to leak. So you really want to use like a quality product. I personally like to use like a 3M or something like that. 3M's 4200, 5200, the 4000 stuff for deck hardware and stuff like that. Not all boats have regular sealant either. Like this right here is a specific sealant. So this right here is a color matched, gel coat color matched sealant. So this actually goes to a scout boat, and that color there is for it's for scout. So it's color matched to the gel coat that goes on the boat. So don't always think that you can just grab a regular tube of sealant and go seal something up, depending on what you're wanting it to look like when you get done. Here's an example of the sealant that just comes out. You know, this is all put in here, but either it wasn't clean, it didn't go all the way down to the bottom, and now it's just all starting to come out. It could be the quality of the sealant, it could be that it's not deep enough. There's multiple reasons why it would come out like this, but again, it's all come out. Not to mention that this console probably shakes as the boat's going, so it's constantly putting a stress on this line between here and the deck of the boat, so that's going to be a hard line to ever keep sealed anyway, but that's just an example. But when it comes to laying a nice sealant line, opposed to having it look like this where it's all bubbling up and it's just, you know, it's not a clean looking line. I mean, look at this, this is all just bubbled up. Yes, it is sealing, and no, it is not separating, but that doesn't really look good. And again, the whole purpose of this video is to make sure this looks really clean, and we're trying to make it look like it came from the factory, not like someone's came back later on and done this. So there's 3 really easy ways of doing this. Once you got everything clean, once you got your sealant, that you've got some nice clean sealant, the first way that you can do a really clean sealant line is to use painter's tape. And what we're going to do is you're going to put painter's tape along the edge of where you are going to seal on both sides of the fiberglass. Once you get the tape on both sides, then you can just come back, put the sealant in, and you want to put it in deep. So put your sealant in deep first, depending on how deep of a place you're trying to seal. If it's really deep, you're going to put one pass in that's down all the way to the bottom. Then you can come back and put a pass in over the top of that. And then we'll come back, wipe it off with your finger to give it a nice clean look, and then you can pull a tape up, which is going to give you a really, really smooth line, and it's going to look good once you get the tape up and let it dry. The second thing that you're going to need to know about, or the second way that we can do this, is to do it wet. Now, when we talk about doing it wet, I'm talking about spraying it down with something. This works really well when you're trying to do longer lines, and you really don't want to do too long of a line. You really want to do it in short passes. But when you've got brand new gel coat or old gel coat and you're just trying to seal something, you're going to put the sealant on there. Again, not too much. You don't have to make a massive mess. You're going to need to keep some rags there to wipe the sealant off of your finger or off of your popsicle stick or whatever you're using to make a nice clean line. Some people like to take a piece of starboard that's routed down at a nice good edge. You can do that, or you could also use a popsicle stick or your finger. For me personally, I just use my finger just because it's easy and I don't have to go get anything. Something else that you need to consider when pulling the sealant off is that you want to do it when it's wet. If you allow the sealant to dry at all, it's going to start to show texture and it's going to show lumps when you wipe it off. If you do short wet bursts where the sealant is still wet, it's going to make it easier and come out really clean, opposed to trying to lay a long line of sealant and then come back and try and wipe it off one thing at a time. Now, as long as you're doing those short lines, it's going to make it easier and you're going to come out smoother. If you try and touch the sealant after it's started to dry, you're just going to mess it up and it's not going to look good. So you're going to want to refrain from touching it once it starts to dry, and a lot of the sealants do not take long to start to dry. So our first method is going to be the tape method. The second method is going to be doing it wet. So you're going to take some degreaser or some simple green, some soapy water, anything that's going to allow you to keep the gel coat wet. As long as the gel coat is wet, the sealant isn't going to stick to the gel coat or the fiberglass or the paint, whatever surface you're doing. As long as you spray your sealant line down and then come back and wipe it off, wipe your finger down a little bit until it starts to come off, wipe that off onto a rag, and then come back over it again, making sure that you keep spraying the surrounding area with the cleaner, degreaser, or soapy water. That's going to be a way to allow you to make a nice clean sealant line. Now, our last method is probably going to be the quickest way, and that's just to do it dry and quick. And this just means that if you're doing it dry and quick, it's usually best to do this on brand new gel coat or brand new paint, because of the wax that's in the paint. It's going to make it a lot easier to clean up whenever the gel coat or the paint is fresh, so that way you don't have to worry about it spreading. But again, you want to do it in short bursts. So try to only do a 1 foot or a 2 foot section at a time. You never want to go more than that, because that allows time for the sealant to dry and it'll make it hard for you to clean up. So when we're doing it in small sections like that, we're going to use our finger to wipe it off, and we're going to start from one end or the other. So you'll put the sealant in with a 1 foot section, and off of that 1 foot section, you're going to take your finger or whatever you're using and start to smooth it out. And you're only going to do a few inches at a time, so that way as soon as the sealant starts to build up on your finger, you can pull your finger off and make sure you leave whatever is starting to pull off, the sealant that's starting to pull off with your finger. Make sure that little line that's going to be, it's basically going to drop off of your finger. Make sure that drops off onto the next section that you're going to wipe off, and you're going to do this in little 3 4-inch sections. So as the sealant builds up, before it allows to build up over onto the gel coat or the paint that you're trying to seal, as long as you keep it building up on your finger, and before it overflows over and touches that gel coat or that fiberglass, pull it off, wipe your finger off, and just do it in those short little sections, and you'll be able to make a really clean line, and you don't have to use any degreaser, any soapy water, any tape, anything. Just lay your 1 foot section of sealant, wipe it off in 3-inch sections, not letting the sealant build up and flow over and touch the gel coat and make a mess, and you can quickly seal up and make a nice, clean looking seal like this that looks professional, like it came from the factory.